to the ROS Media channel. We are live today across our social media platforms. If you're joining us on Facebook or X or Twitter or whatever it's called these days, good to have you with us. Today, we are going to be discussing an administrative reality that banks are not creditors, but mere nominees. And we have the 26-digit IRS fingerprint to prove it as well. So again, joined with my good friend Ian Clifford today, we're going to discuss this forensic breakthrough that is described in your report, Ian, as the smoking gun when it comes to voiding mortgages. So really excited to dig into that. I think, you know, we typically would set the stage with this. So let's do just that in terms of this historical deception that people haven't even been aware of in the vast majority of cases. You know, in your research, it points to a foundational shift in 1933 specifically that changed just the nature of money and how we understand it. Could you maybe just explain in brief the differences between a system of what was quote unquote payment versus our current system of discharge?
Yeah, of course, the banks wanted to basically run the world money system. And in 1913, the Federal Reserve Act came out. Just prior to that, you know, the Titanic sunk, and a lot of people believe that that wasn't a coincidence, because on that ship was a lot of top bankers who were who didn't like the Federal Reserve. They were trying to oppose it coming in, the Federal Reserve Act, because they liked money of substance. They liked traditional banking, where banks actually had reserves in gold or some other physical asset. Normally it was gold. So 1913, everything changed. And then we had the First World War, then we had the boom years of the 1920s. And then we had 1933, where House Joint Resolution 192 came out, which is probably the most pivotal act in the world of money ever, I'd say. Yeah. Because what happened was the United States as a corporate entity was made bankrupt under what they call in the United States Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Now, a lot of people won't realize the significance of that, but it is so significant. What it means is that the creditors, which were the banks and still are, the big banking syndicates, if you like, they're the creditors to the United States. The United States has got the world reserve currency, the dollar. So everything is sort of balanced back, converted back to the dollar. And what it means is that the whole system is being mortgaged. Literally everything in this artificial monopoly game that we're all playing without realizing it, most of us, is that everything on that monopoly board that's artificial has been mortgaged as collateral for the bankruptcy, so that the creditors can basically take out a mortgage over everything on the monopoly board. That's all the assets and, crucially importantly, the energy of the people, which replaced gold. Gold used to be backing money of substance. Now you've got money of account that is backed by the energy of the people. So when it comes to a mortgage, the question that everybody should be asking is, who is the creditor to the mortgage? That's the key question. Yeah. Now, a lot of people have gone down this pathway and have realized that the banks aren't lending their own money. And they think that that is enough in its own right to void a mortgage, but it isn't.
Okay. So you mentioned that the mortgage is created ex nihilo. We've spoken about this before, you know, Richard Werner's empirical evidence there, Bank of England. There's a lot of documentation that supports this, but that it's created ex nihilo from the borrower's signature. How does human credit energy become this circulating obligation then for a bank?
Well, what's happened is, you know, part of the reason why there's a birth certificate it's the registration of a corporate banker on this artificial monopoly board. So you've got a newborn baby that's brought into the world. The placenta is registered. That becomes the decedent estate, but that decedent estate registered to the state is a banker, as confirmed in the Bills of Exchange Act 1882. So what you've now got is a framework of the living man woman is the agent for the birth certificate construct, the decedent estate, which is a banker that can issue negotiable instruments. And those negotiable instruments are described by the banks as deposits. So what you've now got is a mechanism to transfer human energy onto this artificial monopoly board through a signature that the birth certificate construct is going to engage in a transaction, but can't do so without the intention of the living man woman who puts their signature either electronically added to, added into the equation, or it is a physical signature. Doesn't need to be physical. It's just the intention to make a deposit. And that is how the energy gets onto this artificial monopoly board. The energy is then mortgaged by the creditors. And the presumption is that the creditors are in fact the banks. Well, they're not. And that's where the deception starts to deepen down a bit, because the banks are actually nominees. They're not creditors.
Okay.
Presumed to be creditors, and nobody corrects them. So they are actually nominees for the living man woman. The living man woman is the source of the energy, and the banks are nominees for that energy. So a nominee is a trustee, a nominee is a fiduciary. So it's, if I gave you my pen to look after, said, Andy, look after my pen, you've become my trustee, my nominee, my fiduciary, and then you can't claim that that pen belongs to you.
No.
You can use it if I gave you permission to use it, but you can't claim it's yours. And the problem is that the banks are claiming that the energy that's being transferred through deposit belongs to them, and it doesn't. They're just nominees for it.
That's huge. That's huge. Before we get into the nominee structure, you also talk about the original issue discount. Why is that sort of the how can I put it, the mathematical anchor, shall we say, for this entire process?
Well, the original issue discount itself, a lot of people will look on the internet, they'll look on maybe AI and say, what is original issue discount? And it's going to come back with answers that say, if you are trading in securities, if that's what you're doing, and you have overpaid taxes on your securities trades, you're holding these securities and you've paid what's called backup withholding taxes, and you've overpaid them, you can recoup through original issue discount by filing that you've overpaid taxes. Now that's the common practice understanding of original issue discount. But everything on the monopoly board, with the exception of the currency that's being created through central banks creating ex nihilo credit when they buy bonds from the treasuries, with the exception of that, which is only about 3% of the world money supply, everything else is an original issue discount, because the currency that we're all using has only got there because it's been transferred to the monopoly board through a signature, through the corporate construct of the birth certificate construct. That's the banker. Now that energy is on the board, and it has to be valued. What is the value of that energy? Well, when you put it on the board, it goes in at zero, because there is no value to human energy. You can't pick it up. It has no substance value. So it goes on the board at zero value. And then once the banks start to use it, if you imagine that you can now create economic activity, you can create profit, you can expand it, then it has a high future value. It's like saying that you take the ingredients of, fuel, the individual ingredients that aren't mixed together aren't worth very much. But as soon as you mix them together and put them to work, then they become very valuable. Now, the energy on its own, it can't operate on the monopoly board without being converted. It has to be deposited, and the banks have to channel it into their mechanisms that they've got, all of their methodologies and frameworks that they run, and then it can be used on the monopoly board. And now it's got a high future value. And the original issue discount is basically every time it's being used, the energy, it has a usage value. And you can discount back from a very high future value to a current value, which is original issue discount. And that determines the amount of taxes that the banks that are using the energy should be paying for the use of the energy. And they're paying those taxes to the bankruptcy trustee, which is the United States Treasury. But those taxes don't belong to the banks. They don't belong to the United States Treasury. Those taxes belong to the true creditor, the living man, woman who put their energy on the board at the outset of any transaction. And that is what's going on. And it's original issue discount because everything is going on the board with the exception of the way that governments raise finance at zero current value when it goes on the board. But then suddenly it springs up to a very high value. And that's that discounted from the high value to the current value generates backup withholding taxes.
Right. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the actual nominee structure as well, because there are some obstacles here that I think need to be identified. I've read your report, very, very detailed. It talks about how the banks use street names and entities like Seed & Co. to hide the beneficial ownership of this credit. So how does this nominee structure, how does it allow banks to capture the OID income if it doesn't even belong to them in the first place?
Yeah, so you see, it's a deception. And, the banks are being opaque in what they're doing. So they're not being transparent at all in what they're actually doing. The investment banks know that they owe taxes on their 945 tax modules.
Yeah.
But they don't want to publish to everybody that they're paying taxes for backup withholding on original issue discount on human energy.
No,
so what they do, it wouldn't do much for their PR, would it?
No.
What they do is they create a name for the taxpayer. The taxpayer, they use all sorts of names to disguise the fact that they're actually paying taxes for the use of human energy. Seed & Company, which is the depository trust company, used to be, it's only moved recently actually, it strangely enough was in Waterbury Lane in New York. Waterbury as in currency, as in
water.
flow of currency, water.
Yeah.
So that used to be Waterbury Lane, and they literally track every single security that goes on the monopoly board. That's what they do. Now, if you go and have a look at Seed & Company, I think it's CEED is the name of them, you will find that they talk about the fact that they are like a registrar of securities, but they don't talk about the human energy either. So you've got a deception at Seed & Company. You've got a deception with the investment banks who are paying taxes for the use of human energy, but dressing it up as if they're paying taxes for something else. And they typically underfund the 945 tax ledgers. And the reason why is because hardly anybody recoups the taxes that belong to them.
Yeah. So they're just paying what they know they can get away with, I guess.
They just pay a minimum amount, knowing that very, very few actual creditors are going to turn up with the right mechanism, with the right structure to recoup that signature credit. So they don't fund at the level they should do. They fund taxes on other tax modules, but all of those taxes belong to the 945 tax module, because pretty much everything that a bank is doing is trading in human energy. That's really what they do, is they trade human energy.
It's quite shocking when you hear it, to be fair. It reminds me of the movie The Matrix with Keanu Reeves, and how, you know, the technology then was just using humans as batteries, so to speak, and using their biological nature as batteries. It's very, very similar. And we see this often in films, don't we? A lot of what is actually going on is hidden within films, and people just don't realize that.
Well, it's exactly what's going on. You know, when you watch that movie and you see there's a mechanism in the sort of back of the head, and they're sucking out all the energy. That's exactly what's going on with the money system. It's a transfer of human energy, and then and where it, to me, is the most egregious is that they give it back and then charge interest on it when it isn't theirs to charge interest on.
Yeah, to keep you on that hamster wheel. And I think people are feeling it more than ever before. The fact that we're talking here about the banks trading your energy, I think there's a lot of people that are running out of steam in today's day. They're getting tired, they're exhausted, their health is suffering, and the health side of things is that's another rabbit hole that we could go down and talk about for hours, in terms of why they're suppressing people's health and their true potential, biologically speaking. But just kind of going back to this nominee structure, I know we mentioned it a moment ago, but I think just for the layperson listening, why is it so significant that the US Treasury itself serves as this ultimate kind of bankruptcy trustee in all of this?
Well, the only way that the system can work, it can only work in bankruptcy, because everything on the monopoly board is a negative. Everything is a debt. So it's all got a minus in front of it. But they just take the minus away, and then everyone thinks that there's money of substance, because if you saw your bank statement had minus and then a value, you'd think, what's going on? I'm not in an overdraft. Well, you actually are in an overdraft all the time. But you're the supplier of the energy that the banks are providing back to you, and then having the audacity to call it an overdraft or a loan or a credit card or a mortgage, because everything is a negative, because everything on the board is debt. And if you look at, how do you manage a ledger? A ledger has to have a balance. It has to have an equilibrium of debt on one side and credit on the other. Well, if everything on the monopoly board is debt, that on the other side of the ledger, there has to be credit. But the credit doesn't have to be claimed, of course. So it can just be sitting there dormant, abandoned. And the Treasury is operating as the trustee in bankruptcy for the entire monopoly board. So you have to have somebody who sits in the middle of that credit and debit ledger. You have to have an arbiter in the middle. And that arbiter is the United States Treasury, who were given the job to manage the entire monopoly board, which is the world of commerce, as the bankruptcy trustee. But then there's another deception, which is the United States Treasury / IRS. They hold themselves out to everybody as a tax collector. And that is kind of what they're doing. But they never explain, not that I've ever seen, what they actually do with those taxes they collect.
No.
People assume that the economy, the United States economy, is hoovering up all this tax revenue and is going to put it back to work in the economy. That's what people assume.
Yeah.
But it doesn't work like that. It's another deception. You've got to, if you want to keep the slaves in, in slavery, the genius of this system is that you can't let the slaves realize that they're being enslaved. No. You have to make them believe that there is a system with integrity behind it, an honor, and that everybody should pay taxes because that's the honorable thing to do. Because if you're paying taxes, that means that you're helping the governments finance all these good things for everybody to enjoy. And of course, if you don't pay taxes, then you are delinquent. You are, you're a thief, really, because you're stealing things from the monopoly board without paying your dues. Is what they want you to believe. Yeah. I often hear people get very sort of bent out of shape over the fact that some people are claiming benefits for social security benefits, and it's like there's a very deep-seated, like, these people shouldn't be claiming benefits. The immigrants are claiming benefits. We're paying taxes, and then the immigrants are taking those taxes that we've paid to finance their lifestyles. And of course, that is the perception of what is going on, but the reality of what's going on is nothing like that. There's no tax funding of the economy. There's only tax funding of the interest on the debt. So the taxes that the treasuries and all the tax offices are collecting, they're not paying. Those taxes don't go straight into good works or good
education and good schools and better roads and all these things. Yeah.
Those taxes don't go directly to that. What they go to is to pay interest on the national debt. Well, the national debt was created ex nihilo, and it could only be created ex nihilo if the mortgage had been taken out, which it was in 1933 across the entire monopoly board. And, in order to underpin that mortgage, they had to take the birth certificates, and therefore any transactions that those birth certificate entities, those corporate constructs, transfer energy on the board. So it all comes back in a big circle back to the energy of the living is what is financing the whole board. Taxes is an illusion. The banks are using street names to hide the fact that they're paying taxes to the bankruptcy trustee for the use of the energy, and only 1 in a million is ever going to figure out what they're doing. Yeah. So they can deceive, the other 99.99% by making it look like there's a system that you have to play the game. You've got to keep playing the monopoly game, and if you stop playing it, you're gonna be in difficulty. So you've got to keep playing it. You've got to keep paying your taxes. You've got to keep paying the interest on the debt, because if you don't, you're going to end up in dire straits. And that's all part of the slavery model. And the genius of it all, of course, is that 99.99% recurring actually believe all that to be true, because they don't look. They just simply don't look into how it works. So.
Well, I know that you have, and I know that you have a solution to this as well. So I want to talk about that next, because I think when people understand, and specifically we're going to relate this to mortgages, just one form of security that you create during your lifetime. I'm sure most people have had a mortgage or know someone that's had a mortgage or several mortgages. So let's talk a little bit about the actual solution to this fiduciary framework. You talk about a 98 series international grantor trust. Again, we've spoken about this many times. Why is this specific classification necessary to remain off the board from the domestic sort of corporate debtor system as we know it? Because we talk about standing, don't we? Being a debtor or being a creditor. So if you could just please explain a little bit about the 98 series grantor trust and why that's so pivotal to this.
So in order to reposition the ledgers, who the tax is actually owed to, right? So at the moment, the banks are paying taxes to that's the investment banks who are using the human energy. By the way, all mortgages are securitized. I've yet to find one that hasn't been. So they're all securitized, and the investment banks are trading them. That's the most blatant example of trading human energy, because the human energy was transferred onto the monopoly board through the signature. It was then converted. It was a deposit of energy. The banks created this matching liability, which then was sold to, that's a security that's sold to the investment banks. And we'll come back to why they do it like this. There's many reasons, but we'll come back to that in a minute, because they do it deliberately. They separate it, and I'll explain that in a minute. Then what happens is the banks are paying taxes on the securities, on the original issue discount. That's the backup withholding on the use of the human energy. And at the moment, the United States Treasury is not questioning that the banks paying the taxes. They presume that they are the creditors, and nobody corrects them. So all the time they presume that, and there's no correction of who actually is the creditor. Then they get away with acting as the creditor, even though they're not. So they are on very, very thin ice when it comes to their claim that they are the creditor to the mortgage security, and then that claim of creditorship is transferred through to the originating bank, that the mortgage provider. So that you've got this chain between the originator, which is the mortgage provider, the investment bank that's trading the security that was only created through the human energy, and both parties are presuming that they are the creditor to that mortgage. The clearing bank, that's the mortgage provider at the front of the transaction, who then sells the security that they've created to the investment banks. It might go through a few more steps, but ultimately it ends up in the investment bank area. And then there is this tax payment, which is occurring every year for the use of the energy, where the investment bank is presuming to be the creditor. And what makes it worse for them is that they are trustees. They are actually named as indentured trustees, because there are indentures for each of these mortgage securities, the bundles of all of these mortgage securities. The investment banks operate as nominees and also indentured trustees. So that one fact there, right? Why would there be an indentured trustee looking after these securities? And the answer is because they're not the owners of them. They are the fiduciaries, the nominees, indentured trustee. They're the trustee for the securities, which the actual energy belongs to someone else. So they are looking after it as the custodians. But when they fill in their annual returns as trustees, they actually report that the value of the securities belongs to them.
Right. Okay.
And it's actually a fraud, but they get away with it because they are able to presume without question, because nobody questions them.
No,
literally nobody. I'm not saying nobody does, but very few people ever question the fact that the indentured trustee is the creditor. And you can prove that they're not, and that's, maybe we'll come on to that in a minute.
Yeah. So where does this 98 series trust come in then? Why do we need that specific classification?
Well, you see, the only way you can prove that the investment bank indentured trustee is not the creditor is by putting another nominee structure onto the monopoly board. So you're not operating off the board.
No,
you're just putting a structure on the monopoly board that can operate as a nominee for the true creditor, and that makes it the creditor. It makes it the creditor entity on the monopoly board. And that entity is the 98 series grantor trust, which is a foreign alien to the United States. So although it's got a tax reference number, it's not part of the United States system. It's international, and it can then it sits on the board as a nominee, creditor, holder in due course of the credit energy, the human energy that was put on the board through the signature. It can lawfully hold itself out without any challenge. Without, it could be challenged, but the challenge would lose, because it has filed 1099 OID for the true creditor, which is the beneficiary of the grantor trust. So you see the living man woman now is they're off the board when they put the energy through the deposit, the person, the citizen, the birth certificate construct. They can't recoup that energy. They can't hold themselves out as the holder in due course because they're a debtor. The entity itself, the birth certificate construct, is a debtor. It's a banker and a debtor all rolled into one. But then the living man woman can be a beneficiary to the grantor trust, operating as a nominee, operating as a holder in due course of the credit energy, and it earns the right to hold itself out like that because it files 1099 OID. And if you look at, you see it on my screen here, IRS publication 1212, that's exactly what it says in IRS publication 1212. When a 1099 OID is being filed, basically by the creditor, it then shifts the presumption to a fact. The banks are presuming that they're the creditors. They lose that standing. They become debtors. And on this particular mortgage, if we're talking about a mortgage, and the 98 series grantor trust becomes the holder in due course, the creditor entity representing the living man woman who's the beneficiary. And that changes the whole game. That is the game changer, by the way.
No, I know we've spoken about that before, because you can't be on the board. We can't be on the board as a living creditor. We can only have the piece that's on the board currently, the birth certificate construct, but that is a debtor entity, not a creditor. So I get the whole off-board scenario with the 98 series trust, but you've mentioned holder in due course here, and that trust is the holder in due course. How does there's another form that you talk about, IRS form 56. How does that establish the trust's standing as the holder in due course? Because that's something to do with the universal, the Uniform Commercial Code, isn't it? UCC.
Yeah, the UCC is, it used to be many years ago. It was the law merchant. It was a book of, basically a book of commerce, rules of commerce, international commerce. It was upgraded to the Uniform Commercial Code, which is basically a rule book for securities trading. It's two telephone books. If anybody out there remembers telephone books, if you put two of them together, that's your UCC, full of codes and procedures, and basically a rule book, really. And in that rule book, it's telling you that what the holder in due course is, and the holder in due course is the true creditor or representing the creditor. Which, of course, is what's happening with the grantor trust. And the Form 56, when the trust files Form 56 with the United States Treasury, it's basically cementing the standing of the grantor trust. It's like a declaration. It's like, this trust has been set up, and Form 56 has got all the details of its credentials, and it's putting that onto the IRS's system, so that trust now is recorded in the right way. It hasn't filed 1099 OID yet, because you can't file 1099 OID unless you've actually structured the trust in the right way. But it's got the right standing. You've put it on the board and you've used Form 56. Well, when I say you have, the trustee has, because it's the trustee that does that. And if you've got a trust structure where the trustee is lawfully putting the Form 56 together and sending it into the Treasury, the IRS Treasury, they have to have the right credentials to be the trustee. You can't just have anybody as being the trustee. They have to have the right credentials, and all of that is disclosed on the Form 56. So if you like, it's like a validation of the 98 series trust. It's like validating that it's got the right standing to operate as the holder in due course.
Okay. Well, moving this into the actual evidence that we really wanted to get into today, this smoking gun. Let's talk about the technical evidence surrounding this, because if you're running through a 98 series grantor trust, it has the right standing, it has the credentials. We've talked about the OID filing, and we can kind of come on to that potentially in a little bit as well. But I want to talk about this digital fingerprint, because this is quite critical, isn't it? The title of your report calls this 26-digit fingerprint as the smoking gun. What exactly is this alphanumeric string? Because it's a 26 digits of numbers, letters. Why is it superior to maybe just a standard locator number?
Well, it's quite astonishing when I started to research this, because I've known for a long time that the Treasury, the United States Treasury, through seeding company, must be tracking all these securities.
Yeah.
But I couldn't find for a while how they were doing it. Because it's quite complicated, isn't it? You've got digital money that's been around for a long time.
Yeah.
And you imagine how many people there are in the world, transferring their energy onto the monopoly board.
Yeah. Tapping their phones every few minutes at Sainsbury's and at Walmart and wherever they are in the world. Yeah.
Signing up for mortgages, loans, credit cards, bank accounts, setting up all these structures, and then making all these transactions. And if you imagine how many transactions there are, you take the world population and, then say, well, what's the average number of transactions that people do in a week?
Yeah.
It's a huge number if you take the whole world, right?
Because for the benefit of the audience, just for the benefit of people watching this, I mean, I know we've spoken about this on another interview, but just for clarity, we're not just talking here about mortgages that have been taken out, or, huge loans or large credit card bills, whatever that may be. We're talking about every single transaction that you give that intent to, whether it be a real signature or a digital signature. It is a means of intent. So I spoke about using your phone. Every time you go to the local supermarket or you go to fill your car up with fuel and you tap your phone, if you use contactless, that is a signature. That is a security created. So are you saying that there is a 26-digit alphanumeric code for every one of those transactions globally?
Yeah, I mean, I remember watching one of the movies that I've enjoyed watching is the Enigma. It's the Enigma code, and it was based on the Enigma machine and the guy who allegedly invented the computer.
That's right.
And so if you've ever watched the movie, it's got Dominic Cumberbatch in it. He's the guy who invents the cipher that untangles the Germans. Allegedly the Germans had a messaging system, and they were moving all their armies and navies and air forces about with this Enigma machine, and he came up with a system that would be able to untangle their signals and make sense of them. And he used the first computer. It's worth watching the movie if you haven't seen it.
It's a great film. It's a great film.
It's a good film, yeah, and it's actually based on a true story, so it's even more relevant. Now, if you look in that movie, how do you untangle something which is very complex, you have to do it with a numbering sequence, and that's basically what a computer is. It's ones and zeros, isn't it? It's all numbers that are being, presented in different combinations. Is how referencing works, and 26 digits, that leaves the door open for a lot of individual tracking, doesn't it?
It does.
If you were to ask your AI system, if you're using one, how many combinations can you come up with a 26-digit reference number, and it will be trillions.
Yeah.
So the reason why the IRS have 26 digits is because there's so many transactions going on, not just going on at the moment, but they've got to track all the ones that have already completed. All that new credit that went on the monopoly board, they've got to track it all. And the way they do it is they divide that 26 digits up into different categories. So you've got like the bank the birth certificate, the banker that enabled the signature credit to get on the board. Then you've got the bank, then you've got the security, then you've got the country. So it's quite logical how they've actually done it. In fact, it's extremely logical. If it wasn't logical, there's no way they could pull it off. So that's how they do it. And they basically track every single event of a signature deposit. Now, a bank payment is a signature deposit. Signing up for a mortgage is a signature deposit. A credit card, a loan, they're all signature deposits. Energy deposits, that's what they are. And that system, the Irmf system, is tracking everything. And people say, well, we don't want digital money, we don't want tracking and tracing. We've already got it.
Had it for years. Yeah, I get that. Interesting how it's 26 digits and there's 26 letters in the English alphabet. I don't know whether there's any correlation to that or not, but possibly not.
That intrigues me. I'm going to look into that because there's a lot of things in this whole system that, like things like Waterbury Lane for the company that's tracking, holding all the records. Waterbury Lane, really? And there's lots of clues that they put out there. It's like Sherlock Holmes would have had a really good time looking into this, I think, because there's lots of clues that you can see along the way. That you join them all together and you make up you can figure out the plot. Well, I think I've figured out the plot, and I think I've figured out who done it, and it's not us, it's the banks.
No. So if we've got access to these 26-digit codes, how does having this string of code turn what would have been maybe a legal theory into an actual verified fact, a ledger verified fact? And how can courts not ignore that?
Well, the system is, it's very, very good at shielding itself from any challenge. So if you go and just walk through this, right? Go make a complaint to the bank that allegedly provided the mortgage and say, I just realized that you didn't lend me any money. So therefore, my mortgage must be void, right? So unless you can prove to me that you lent me your money, my mortgage with you is void. Well, they won't engage with that and try and prove that they did lend you any money. They will just back you away and come up with, you signed a contract and it says in the contract X, Y, Z, and you got the house, didn't you? So we must have lent you money. That's what they'll come and say, right? Or you got the money to refinance your loan. So we must have lent you something because look at what happened. You got the money, yeah. That's what they'll say. And then you go to the court and you might say, well, I've got proof that the banks don't lend their own money. Look at what Professor Richard Werner's written in all of his research papers. Look at what the Bank of England's telling us. Look at what the Federal Reserve is telling us in all these papers that I've got. So therefore, this mortgage must be void because there's no consideration in the loan. So I've read this is the guy who's going in the courtroom. He's read his law books on contracts, and he's going, well, there's no consideration, therefore there's no contract because the banks didn't lend their own money. And then he might say, well, of course, you know, when the bank transferred my signature, and if he's really smart, transferred my signature credit to the investment bank, there was a registration gap, meaning that the bank that's pretending to be the mortgage provider, they weren't actually entitled to take a charge over the property, because they'd sold the credit to an investment bank. So there's this gap which has been written about. So therefore, my mortgage is void. Yeah, and the judge is going to say, well, you got the house or the money, so therefore we can forget about the contract argument. He's going to say, or he or she's going to say, well, it's okay that you talk about you know, the registration gap, for example, but there's a charge. I'm looking at the charge at the registry over this property the mortgage company's got, and it's already there. So, you know, all these other very high profile, very complicated presentments that you're bringing in the courtroom, it doesn't really matter to me. If I'm a judge, I'm going to say, well, is there a charge on this property? Yes or no? Well, I see it, and I see it's been registered, and nobody objected to it at the time. So therefore it's still there, and that's all we're talking about, isn't it? We're just talking about the mortgage charge on the property. And it appears that the mortgage charge is in the favor of the mortgage provider. So that's all I'm going to look at as the judge. I don't care about signatures. I don't care about contracts. I don't care about registration gaps. I don't care about wet ink signatures. I don't care about, you know, is it a fair contract? Because people have said it's an unfair contract. The judge doesn't care about any of that. Just cares about whether there's a charge against the property. And of course there is. And that's all he cares about, or he or she cares about.
So let's talk about the actual protocol itself then, because I think it seems to me like this is a bit of a labyrinth for people to be able to try and navigate and understand how to do it. You can't just go into the court with all of this documentation. And as you've clearly pointed out, they're only interested in the fact that there's a charge against the property. So whatever you present, but in terms of the actual protocol to go through this, clearly there is a sequence. There's a sequence, there's an order in which things need to be done. Timing's important. Clearly structure is important. You've spoken about having the 98 grantor trust and having the right standing through Form 56. There's a lot of moving parts to this. So could you maybe just walk us through, in line with the fact that we are talking about somebody's mortgage here, what is the front to back process to getting the desired result, regardless of what the banks think, regardless of what the courts think? There's obviously a way of doing this, and you've figured it out. So what's the starting point?
Well, the first step is that you've got to realize that you're not going to win against the mortgage provider, whether you're complaining or whether you're in a courtroom, with any of the arguments I've just outlined, because none of those ever work. Now, you know, as I've said many, many times, court cases are not about right and wrong. Court cases are about procedure. So going in arguing that the bank didn't lend any money, that's right and wrong. Well, the courts don't care about right and wrong. They only care about procedure. So what you've got to do is you've got to be able to fit into the procedure of the court. So if you are looking to void the mortgage, then you've got to win the battle before you started it. So the art of legal warfare, Sun Tzu, the art of war, don't ever go into battle until you've already won. It's pretty smart, yeah? I mean, why would you want to lose? You know, it's pretty important, yeah? So you're going to have to try and win before you start. Well, how do you defeat the judge who's going to say, well, all I'm looking at is the mortgage charge, and it appears to be there. It's never been challenged. And have you got any challenge of that mortgage charge? No? Okay, so you lose and the bank wins. And that's basically what you've got to address. How can you change the game? You know, there's a reason why I've called it the game changer, because it does change the game. but you can't just go into the court or complain to the bank that provided the mortgage and say, well, you know, over in New York, there's, you know, I've just established that the investment bank, the indentured trustee, they're not the creditor, because no one's going to listen to that. If you were in, you know, in Canada or Australia or in the United Kingdom or any other country, and the mortgage securities being traded in New York by investment banks, indentured trustees in New York, you've got to join those two together.
Yeah.
So, you know, it's like two planets in the universe. One planet doesn't care what's happening on the other planet. So in the local area, wherever the mortgage was granted, that's like a planet. And then there's another planet over here that is trading the mortgage security. Well, those two planets need to be joined. The two jurisdictions need to be joined, if I'm going to use correct terminology. But, okay, you know, looking at it like two planets in a universe is quite a good way of looking at it, because they're in the solar system, but they're not joined at the moment.
No.
Allegedly, there is a joinder, but we won't go into that. So what you've got to do is you've got to change the ledger. The ledger meaning the credit debit ledger. You've got to become, you've got to have the ability to hold out, and holding out is really important in the law. It's like a representation of your standings. If you're holding out as the creditor, you've got to be able to prove it.
Okay.
Well, how do you prove that you're the creditor? You can't just say you're the creditor, because people have tried that and that never works.
Yeah.
You've got to have some evidence of being the creditor. You can't just say it, even though you are right in saying it. And when I say you, I'm meaning the living man. Woman is the creditor. You can't just go into a court battle and say, I'm the creditor and this mortgage should be voided, because there's no evidence that you're the creditor. So you've got to create the evidence. You've got to get that. You've got to get that evidence, and then you've got to record it. And you know, that's what you do. Is basically you go through a sequence. So first of all, you've got to set up. Well, let's go right from the beginning. You've got to know the mortgage provider list, right? You've got to know the value of the mortgage. So you know the mortgage provider name. They might have changed their name. It doesn't matter, because there'll still be a record of them. You've got to know the value of the mortgage. You've got to pretty much know the year you took it out, roughly speaking. Better to know the year, not catastrophic if you don't, if you've forgotten the year you took it out. So the amount, the bank, and the year is quite important.
Yeah.
Not the year isn't that important, but it's good to have the year, right?
It helps. Yeah.
Then you've got to know, you've got to be, you've got to start the process off with getting a 98 series grant or trust set up.
Yeah.
And if you're doing signature credit recoupment, you'll already have one.
Yeah.
Because you should be recouping all the other signature credit. So part of this process is the voiding of a mortgage. That mortgage security should be bundled up in with all the other securities you've put on the monopoly board since the age of 18. So you've got all your bank payments, other mortgages, credit cards, loans. Put all that together, get that into the system, which is the monopoly game changer. You know, that's the system there. That's the protocol. And part of that, the actual mortgage that you're looking to void will be the linkages between its creation, the outset, the signature that created the mortgage, the transfer of it, energy through to the investment banks. That will all be reported in a very, very important report. So there will be a securitization report that will track the signature, the bank, the bank that allegedly lent the money on the mortgage, the investment banks, the securities where they're actually holding the credit energy, and importantly, the taxes that they're paying on the use of that credit energy. So all of that is tracked and put into a securitization and holder in due course report. Now, what I've been able to do is to get an AI system to track all that, which is quite astonishing, really, when you think about it. Because
I would say so, because that would be an impossible thing to find amongst billions and billions of transactions for an individual to manually try and do that and find that from a mortgage that might be 20 years old. Amidst everybody else's mortgages and everybody else's securities that they've created, throughout that time frame. I can't imagine that ever being done manually. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the audit side and the tracking side then, because I think that's important. You talk about specific mortgages that can be tracked in the securitization arena. Can you explain this? You talk about a triangulation process, don't you? Using CUSIP numbers. Is that what you're talking about here when it comes to tracking this stuff?
Well, it's part of it, yeah. It's
okay.
The CUSIP is a securities reference number. So all of these securities that are being traded, if you imagine that they're like wrappers, and inside the wrapper is the actual mortgage contracts themselves, and all the future cash flows that the banks are picking up. That's the interest side of mortgages, yeah. So all that future mortgage interest is, it's flowing into these securities in individual mortgages that are then bundled up into like a program or a collective, a whole load of them with a wrapper around them. That wrapper is the security, and that wrapper has the CUSIP number. Now, what the IRS system does is it will know within the wrappers what actual mortgages are in there. And that's what I've been able to find with an AI system. So in order for an AI to find all that, it's got to read many, many thousands. It could even be millions of bits of data, and triangulate it all and join it all together so that you've got a straight line from the mortgage when it was originated all the way through into the tax payments that the investment banks are paying for the use of that signature credit energy, and all of the linkages between AI system, the system that I've developed to do this, can find it. And that all goes into a mortgage securitization and holder in due course forensic report, which is not designed on its own to prove that the mortgage, the creditor is in fact the living man, woman. It's not there to hold up in front of a judge in a local courtroom and say, hey, look at this securitization report. This proves my mortgage is void. What it's designed to do is to categorically prove to the indentured trustee, which is the investment bank, that they are holding themselves out, breaching the Indentured Trustee Act of 1939 on three key areas, that they are basically lying. Just to summarize it without going into all the detail, they have been sending in returns presuming that they are the creditor to this mortgage security, and in fact they're not. So they've misreported it, and that's a big problem for them.
Yeah,
they're supposed to report the truth, and they're not, because they get away with it because they're never challenged. So when you've got that report, then you now need to challenge the indentured trustee to prove that they are the creditor. Well, they can't prove that because the grantor trust, that, remember, we set up the grantor trust as the nominee, as the holder in due course. That grantor trust has filed 1099 OID, and the IRS, and this is critically important, has confirmed that that particular mortgage, the security that is being filed under the CUSIP number, now the holder in due course is now the grantor trust. So the investment bank can no longer hold itself out as the creditor, and it's proven by the IRS. They provide the proof because when the 1099 OID is filed, by the way, it's not sent in, in an envelope and a bit of paper. It's done electronically.
Yeah.
So it's done through tax preparer software.
Yep.
Filed in, and then you get a confirmation of its acceptance. Well, the trust does, and that is the proof that now the mortgage the ledger is now being corrected, and you shifted the presumption from the investment bank who were presuming that they were the creditors. Now it's on record at the IRS that the grantor trust is the holder in due course, the creditor entity. That's the game changer right there. That proof from the IRS.
Yeah. And that all links to this 26-digit reference number to solidify that as well, because every single security has one. So there's no getting away from this, is there? There's absolutely no way out for the bank when it comes to what you've put together here.
Well, the only way out for a mortgage, by the way, the mortgage provider is no longer, they're basically a servicing agent, right? So they created the mortgage from the signature. Yeah, okay, fine. And you couldn't have got the mortgage without them, so they have got some value in this transaction. But they then sold it on, made a bundle. They make a lot of money on mortgages. Multiply the face value of the mortgage up is what they're making for being a middleman, right? For just being a middleman and having the accounting credentials to convert signature credit into currency, and then they sell it on, do very well from that. And then they do even better than that because they get a share of the interest that is being paid every month. Most of it goes to the investment bank, but they get a share of it as the servicing agent. So even at that level, it's like, well, you guys who are claiming to be the mortgage providers, all you're doing is collecting the interest really on the mortgage and maybe the principal, but it all flows back to the investment bank, who don't really have any entitlement to it. If you want to go deeper into it, which I have done, what entitlement does the investment bank have to this interest? That's a subject for another discussion probably, but
Sure.
So what you're going to do here is you're going to turn a presumption into a fact. The presumption that the banks are making and they're getting away with it, and the reason they get away with it is because they've separated the jurisdictions. So in the local area, you've got the mortgage provider, and the courts only care about the charge. They don't care about what's going on, in New York. No local court's gonna say, well, I take on board everything in this package of documents here, because they're going to say, well, we don't care what's happening in New York.
No,
we don't care what's happening in some investment bank. That's nothing to do with the charge. So they've separated, compartmentalized the front end of the process with a big line down the middle, which is when the mortgage security crosses over to the investment banks.
Yeah.
And the local courts are going to say, we don't care what happens over there. That's Mars and Venus. We don't care what's happening on Venus. We only care what's happening on Mars. And Mars is where the mortgage charge is. So that's all we care about. And that is what they've done, so that they don't have to engage in arguments about, does the bank lend money? Is the mortgage securitized? Is it fair? Is there a true contract? All of these things, they already knew that they were going to be challenged on all of those things. And their defense is, it doesn't matter because that's happening on Venus and we're on Mars. And that is basically the defense. So you've got to bring those planets together. And that's what my process does.
So when it comes to the charge being removed, because obviously if you're going to avoid a mortgage, then the charge needs to go. So how can a homeowner use the 1099 OID, the ledger correction, to argue for the removal of the mortgage charge based on the fact that this is a mistake in the register?
So you've got to get the indentured trustee into a courtroom, and that typically happens in New York. It doesn't have to. It typically happens in New York because, strangely enough, nearly every investment bank is operating in New York, which is quite an interesting concept in its own right. So you've got to get basically either the investment bank is going to surrender and say privately, yeah, you're right, we're not the holder in due course anymore, or you've got to get it on record. So it's either going to be on record because you're taking them to court in New York, which it's not as daunting as it sounds, because the matter is really quite simple. You've got a forensic securitization report, mortgage securitization report, that proves all of the linkages have been proven in the report. You've got confirmation. The trust has got, I keep saying the trust has got confirmation that the mortgage, the 1099 OIDs changed the holder in due course to the grantor trust. You've got all the proof. You've got the proof from the tax filing software and the IRS acceptance of it. And you've got IRS publication 1212 that says that as soon as the nominee files 1099 OID in accordance with publication 1212, the ledger has to be corrected. And you've got all of that in your securitization report. And that report, if the investment bank indentured trustee is going to argue, the only argument that they can come up with is, well, we're not the indentured trustee for that mortgage. That's the only thing they can say. But the securitization and holder in due course report, because they've been able to get away with that argument many, many times before, right? But in the securitization report, it is pivotal. It's what is going to make the difference here. It tracks everything.
Right.
So they're going to have to prove that that tracking is not correct. And I say it is. And I say it's been done by AI. And I say that they can't defeat it because the only weak defense they've ever had is, well, we're not the indentured trustees for that mortgage. Go and prove that mortgage is in our under our purview, and you can't do it.
No,
but you can now with the mortgage securitization report.
So this AI-based system, I want to talk briefly about that as well, because I think the orchestration behind this allows for scalability as well to some extent in terms of people being able to do this with a mortgage. So let's just say that the technology is automating that, as you said. It allows us to discover the data, forensically speaking, which would be impossible for a human to track. There's something in there that you talk about, which is called timeline delta as well. How does that help you predict when manual intervention, let's say, is needed in this process to kind of satisfy a recoupment?
Well, the key event is the creation of the grantor trust, the tracking of the whole A through Z tracking with all the reference numbers, all the names of all the entities that have all been joined together in this process. Then the standing of the grantor trust that files the 1099 OID. Then you've got the acceptance of that filing from the IRS through their software, because it's their approved software that is being used to file the 1099 OID. You get an acceptance back that proves that the grantor trust is now the holder in due course. You've got the reference to the IRS 1212, and then what you do is you file something called an adverse claim. So the grantor trust that is now the holder in due course, the creditor, files a notice of adverse claim to the indentured trustee, which puts them on notice to prove that they are still the creditor on this mortgage, already knowing that they're not. So you've set them up. So they're either going to have to lie, which is perjury,
as a trustee.
That could be a trustee,
career ending, I would imagine.
Career ending and a lawsuit for what's called misfeasance in office. which is a serious misdemeanor if you're a trustee.
Yeah.
Unless they can find some evidence that they are the creditor and that the securitization and holder in due course report is wrong, they're going to lose, because all the evidence, you've got it's the smoking gun. You know, you've got the video of the murder, you've got the gun, you've got the guy shooting it, you've got the bullets, you've got everything. You've got everything you need to prove that that event happened in the way that your report says. You've got everything.
Yeah. And the bullet's got 26 digits on it as well.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
So
I love it.
They're going to have to come up with something else that is going to get them off the hook. And I can't see what it is, because I know I've looked into this because I do research these types of things. Yeah. In the past, investment banks that have been taken to court, their standard defense is, well, prove that this mortgage is in our securities bundles, and then we'll have a chat. And people couldn't prove it very easily. I mean, you could get a forensic report done, but it wasn't able to find all the reference numbers and join it all together. It was a lot of it based on assumptions of the investment bank being the holder of the mortgage security in their structures, but it wasn't able to forensically prove it. And critically, it didn't have a 1099 OID. So the argument used to be, if I just make this clear, right?
Yeah.
People would go into court in New York and say, that investment bank there, indentured trustee, is not the creditor on my mortgage. And the judge would say, what proof have you got that that is the case? And you'd say, because I've read all the paperwork, I've read all the books, I've read all the manuals, I've listened to all the experts, and this bank didn't lend me any money, and they didn't, they don't hold the right of creditor, because banks don't lend money, right? And the judge is going to say, well, that's a very interesting point that you make there, but what proof have you got that this bank isn't holding your mortgage as the creditor?
Yeah.
And you say, well, I don't have any proof, but I've got all of this circumstantial evidence that points to the fact that this bank isn't the creditor. And the judge is going to say, without evidence, what do you want me to do? You know, I can't award in your favor if you're not providing me with the evidence.
Yeah.
So that's what it used to be like, right? And the banks would say, well, we don't know where your mortgage is. You know, we can't confirm one way or another whether your mortgage is in our securities bundles, because we've got millions of mortgages. So unless you can prove it's in there, we'll see you later. And then that case loses.
Yeah.
So that the difference that we've got now is we've got, and by the way, the forensic reports would be filled full of assumptions, you know, and you pay a lot of money for these reports. We're talking many, many thousands for a forensic mortgage report, securitization report. So we've now got a system that can do that, as long as we've got the base facts of, as I say, the mortgage name, the name of the mortgage provider, the rough year, the amount. The system can track it. And that, to me, is the irony of AI, is that people don't like it because it's part of the control agenda, but you can actually use it to pick the lock of the investment banks and get into their inner circle of where they've always had their defense, and you can use it. You can use it against them to reveal the truth, because everyone's got to remember that I'm not coming up with some system that is it's dishonorable, or it's some loophole, or we're attacking the banks because they're the good guys and we're going to take them down because we don't like them. All we're doing is revealing the truth about how a mortgage works, and that everyone's being deceived, and has been from day dot, from when mortgages were first introduced. And all we're doing is exactly what Sherlock Holmes used to do, is prove it.
Yeah. So for somebody, let's say someone's facing a mortgage foreclosure, I want to talk a little bit about, practical steps moving forward. What would be the very next step that person would need to take now that we've seen the evidence, now that we understand at least the mechanics behind how this works, that you've got the right standing, the right entity on the board, you've got the IRS 1099 OID going in, so that's verified by the IRS, goes through the 810 algorithm. Again, probably goes on to the wages and tax transcript as evidence to the fact that it does belong to the 98 grantor trust. All of this is kind of going on in the background. So what would be if someone's in up against the wall in mortgage foreclosure, what would be the first steps they would need to take to align themselves with this particular protocol, the monopoly game changer?
Yeah, but there's two main scenarios that go on. There's the mortgage which is being serviced, where there's no arrears, or might just be a little bit of arrears, but there's no imminent threat of mortgage foreclosure.
Yeah.
And then you've got mortgage foreclosure, where typically there's a lot of arrears. The mortgage provider is filing in court, or they've already filed to court to get a foreclosure, a warrant for the foreclosure event, and the eviction of the mortgagor, which is the alleged borrower. So you've got those two scenarios. So if it is just voiding a mortgage, then there's lots of time, right? There's no imminent time threat here, right?
Okay.
So you're not up against it. You haven't got the bailiffs turning up in a few days' time. You've got lots of time to establish the monopoly game changer. You've got to get that on board, right? You've got to get on board with that, which is the combination of the Envoy protocol, the Asset Fortress protocol, and the Currency Creation protocol. That's your bundle. What I'm advertising at the top here. That's your bundle, right? That gives you the structure that you need to be able to now, and we will be launching this soon, use an AI and avatar combination, which you will be able to access, where it will guide you, that you're doing, you're running this case, right? So you are going to run your own case. We're not running your case. We're just giving you the avatar and the AI system that will run the case. So if it's a mortgage, if you're voiding a mortgage, there's no court case, right? So that is a different scenario to a mortgage foreclosure. If it's voiding a mortgage, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to enroll in the monopoly game changer. You're going to make sure that the mortgage that you want to void has filed 1099 OID. So all the things we've already spoken about, you've got to get all that done. That can be done within the first sort of month or 6 weeks of starting off. Now you've now got the big first domino has fallen over for the mortgage provider, right? So you're still paying the mortgage. They don't even know that you filed 1099 OID. They have no idea.
That's what I love about this. They haven't got a clue what's going on in the background.
They're on Mars and you're on Venus doing it over here, right? They don't know what you're doing, and they don't need to know. And there's nothing they could do about it, even if they did know, right? Because you're only following the law it's basically you're following securities law. That's all you're doing. So you get that in place. And then the next thing is you're going to get a mortgage securitization report. Critical. That report, without that report, you haven't got the evidence. Sherlock Holmes hasn't found the murder weapon. You've got to get that report, right? And your AI system will enable you to get that report and create. And that report is what you're then going to use. You're then going to serve on the indenture trustee this adverse claim, which is you're not in court yet.
No,
you haven't got to court yet. You're just serving a notice on the indenture trustee. It's called an adverse claim, giving them the opportunity to prove that they are the creditor. If they don't come back with proof, then they are admitting that they're not the creditor. So now you've got evidence from your mortgage securitization report, and you've got the fact that they haven't rebutted the notice. You're acting completely honorably. You're saying, look, I say that you're not the creditor. You've got a certain number of days to prove that you are. Unless you prove that you are, we'll see you in court.
Yeah.
And even if you prove that you are, we'll still see you in court because we're going to dispute that. Once the time is elapsed on the adverse claim, you then file for a court hearing, which is mostly done on the papers, by the way. So you don't have to fly to New York and stand in a courtroom and argue with high-flying New York lawyers. You don't need to do that. You just need, it's all done on the papers. Nearly every single court case these days is done on the papers, right? It's only really high-profile cases or lower down cases in the magistrate's court or the county court, which is just like a drama session. Nearly everything else, certainly in this area, is done on the papers, right? It's all done electronically. So the case will then, but your AI system will create the documents that you need to file to court. You're also going to serve, and this is critically important. You're going to serve, because serving is very important in any process in the legal system. You're going to serve on the mortgage provider and the indentured trustee. That the case is now going on in New York. And that case is only talking about one thing. It's only talking about whether the indentured trustee is or is not the creditor. You've got all the evidence that says that they're not, and they haven't rebutted your notice because they can't. Because if they do, they're going to be lying under perjury, and they're going to be breaching the Indentured Trustee Act. So you've won the battle before you started, right? Then what you do is either they settle before the court case, or they put up all manner of spurious bullshit arguments, which is what they often do, because they know that they are up against it, and they'll try and railroad you out, and they'll try and make up a whole load of bullshit, basically. And you just keep coming back to the facts. You know, the court cases should be won on the facts in this area, right? There's no supposition, no opinions. It's all based on the evidence. So then there should be a judgment in favor of the grantor trust. Now let's just walk this through, right? If the judge says, well, we don't believe that this evidence is real, you've got it from the IRS. So is the court going to dispute the IRS's own evidence? They've sent out their evidence, the reference numbers, their confirmation. Is the judge in New York going to say, well, we don't believe the IRS when they send this out?
I doubt it very much.
I don't think so.
No.
That would be a bit of an issue, I think, if they did that. So it should prove that the indentured trustee, the investment bank, is not the creditor. Now, that is the second big domino that's going to fall over, right?
Okay.
You've now got, if you are a winner in this court case in New York, which you should be, if everything works out in the way that the evidence supports, then you should win that. Now, that then, and this is another critically important thing, invalidates the charge on the property in the local area. Because the only way that charge can be lawful is if the originating bank, the mortgage provider bank, can claim that the mortgage was granted by them as the creditor.
And you've just
proved
that not to be the case in a New York court.
Because they were never the creditor. We all know that. But no evidence that they weren't the creditor up until now. Now there's evidence that they were never the creditor. So the charge they've got on the property is void from the outset. Now, if you're just voiding a mortgage, you then go to the mortgage provider with the evidence that you've got of winning in New York, and you instruct them to remove the charge from the land registry or whatever the registry is, whichever country you're in. And if they don't do that, then you take them to court. They will lose because you've got all the evidence. You
Yeah.
can go straight to the registry and say, I have the evidence that this mortgage charge was put on the register as a mistake.
Yeah.
It needs to be taken off the register. Here's the proof.
Yeah.
Right. So that's mortgage voiding. Now, if it's mortgage foreclosure, the first thing you're going to do is you're going to get into your avatar and your AI system, and you're going to examine exactly what paperwork the mortgage provider has served into the courtroom against you.
Okay.
Every single court case, there is paperwork that is served on the court by the mortgage provider, by their lawyers, right? I have yet to see, and I've looked at a few, done some forensic research, as I do. I have yet to see any case, including my own cases, and cases I've looked at just as a forensic researcher, just looking to see whether the banks who are claiming that they have the entitlement to foreclose, I've never seen yet them make a perfect presentation to the court.
Right.
Remember, court cases are all about procedure.
Yeah. Not about what's right and wrong. Okay.
Yeah, I've yet to see a perfect presentation of all the documents filed in exactly the right order, at exactly the right time, in exactly the right way. I've never seen it. I'm not saying it's never happened, but I've yet to see it. And there's a reason why they don't file all of the documents in the right way at the right time with the right credentials and, you know, all the ticking all the boxes. There's a reason why they don't do it. And the reason is because they have massive hubris.
Yeah.
Because they always win. So why do they need to follow all the procedural steps, which is going to cost
win
them
anyway,
more money and take them more time, when they always win? So they get sloppy and they get a bit arrogant. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter anyway, because we always win when we get to the court case itself. So why do we need to bother with all these procedural steps? And I've only ever seen mistakes. By the way, it's not just in mortgages. I've seen it in many cases. So, you know, if you look at it forensically, then you spot all these errors. So the very first thing you're going to do in a mortgage foreclosure is find the Achilles heel of the mortgage provider case against you if you're in mortgage foreclosure.
Right. So we're looking for procedural flaws here. We're not arguing. We're looking for a procedural flaw to buy time, as I understand it, while the correction is being made, the 1099 is still being filed, while all of that's going on in the background, as you would do anyway, because it's part of the process. You're getting them on procedure here, yeah.
You see that the courts. And by the way, I'm not giving anyone legal advice here. I'm just saying from a forensic research point of view, court cases are decided on the facts and decided on the procedures.
Yeah.
If one side of a court case, one side of a battle, you know, you've got two sides to every battle, makes procedural errors, you can get cases stayed, which means that they just don't carry on for years sometimes, or they can be actually struck out because there's no merit to them on procedural grounds. So if you're in mortgage foreclosure and the petitioner, which is the claimant, the bank that's claiming that you know, they're going to try and get you out of the house or evict you from your apartment or whatever it is, they have almost certainly made some procedural errors somewhere. Either they have or their lawyers have in what's called the practice protocols, which is the civil procedure rules. In every country, there's a rule book. Again, it's a couple of telephone books thick of all the things that the claimant's got to do, exactly how they've got to do it, in the right order, in the right way, at the right time. And they generally don't do that. So you find that Achilles heel. That is how you stall them, right? So you've got your fortress, and at the gates of your fortress, you're going to stall them by procedural irregularities. Yeah. Whilst you're working away in your filings, in your grant or trust, and your 1099 OID, and you're IRS publication 1212 and your forensic securitization report, which you're doing all of that,
in
and
the
they
background.
don't know.
No.
You don't need to disclose it because it's your right to do it anyway. So you're just buying time until you can win in New York and then bring your win from New York back to the case in the local area.
Yep.
And now your presentment in the local court, if you're in foreclosure, is not, there's no signed contract. There's a gap in the, the registration gap. There's no wet ink signatures. The bank didn't lend me any money. You're not arguing any of those things.
No.
You're going in there with a judgment from New York that says that the mortgage provider never lent you any money with the proof.
Yeah.
Because signature credit came from you. And you've now got the forensic proof of it from a superior court. Because when you look at international jurisdictions, there's something called comity.
Yeah.
Now, for people to get their head around this, right, the party of interest in a mortgage is not the mortgage provider if the mortgage is being securitized. The party of interest is the indentured trustee.
Yeah.
So they have superior position in this mortgage, yeah, because they claim that they're the creditor. So if there is a court case win against them and they are above the mortgage provider, remember the mortgage provider is a servicing agent.
Yeah. So by default,
they've given up their standing because they sold the mortgage. They're just a mortgaging servicing agent.
Yeah.
So in New York, you've got superior jurisdiction, and internationally it's called comity. The New York court ranks higher than any local court because it's a very high profile court in New York, but B, it is because the case is won against the party of interest, which is the mortgage indentured trustee, which is superior. You've gone up the chain. You've gone mortgage. You've gone to the ledger, which is the United States Treasury, the IRS, and you've gone to a superior court. And now you're bringing that into the local court, which is subservient to both of those.
Gotcha. Art of legal warfare, as you say. It's all about strategy, all about timing, all about positioning, isn't it?
Yeah, you got to win the battle before you go into it. And, I'm not saying, and just to be clear, I'm not guaranteeing that every single one of these is going to win because I can't guarantee that. I can't guarantee anything. All I can do is all I always do is look at the process and find its weaknesses and come up with a solution to those weaknesses. That's all I can do. So, I'm not giving a cast iron guarantee that this will work every time. I can't, because who knows what can happen. There could be a judge who's been bribed with, around the back door. Who knows what can happen. All I can say is that if there is a railroading that happens, there will be an appeal. There will be the opportunity to appeal. Let's just talk about the worst that can possibly happen.
Yeah, I wanted to say that. Or, in terms of, let's say you didn't win, because you've got your 1099 going on in the background over here. Let's not forget that. You've got your recoupment of that abandoned credit energy, the taxes paid coming back in. So worst case scenario, let's just kind of unpack that for a second.
Let's imagine that you're in mortgage foreclosure and you're going to hold the enemy at the gates. You found a procedural error. You've stored them. There's all sorts of delays going on because of what you found. Your AI has found that. You're not looking for that, by the way. The AI is looking for it.
Yeah.
You've loaded up your documents into the AI, and the AI is going to find where the weakness is. So you've stored them. You've set up the Monopoly Game Changer. You've filed your 1099 OID on the mortgage and all your bank payments and all your other mortgages and credit cards, loans, if you've ever had any of those. So you're now sitting on probably a multi-million-dollar signature credit recoupment event.
Yeah.
In nearly every one of our members that's doing the signature credit, it's multiple millions is what they are looking to recoup.
Yeah.
It's more, almost certainly a great deal more than the mortgage face value.
Yeah.
So the worst that can happen is that you lose the court cases and then you discharge the mortgage with the signature credit recoupment.
Yeah.
And then guess what? You then recoup the discharge. So you, in common language, you've paid off the mortgage from your trust, because that's where your signature credit is. The funds are going to go to your trust. You've paid the mortgage off by discharging it with the signature credit recoupment you've just received. And that in itself, that event of discharge is another signature credit event, which puts more energy on the monopoly board, which you can recoup back in the following year.
Yeah.
So you cannot lose.
No.
You don't lose this game. You can't lose this game. You might lose the court case if there's a bent judge, or if there is something going on that you can't deal with because it's been corrupted in some way. And I'm not saying it is corrupted, because I can't know what every case will look like. All I know is that the facts are in your favor.
Yeah.
The mortgage is void. You've got all the evidence, but you've got a contingency, which is even if the enemy manages to find a way to keep the mortgage on the books, you can discharge it and then recoup the discharge. So you should go into this with a great deal of confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I absolutely love it. I think it's very, very elegant in terms of how it's been put together, Ian. And, this is why we call it the Monopoly Game Changer Protocol. It really does flip the board, doesn't it? And in terms of people watching this right now, if you want to know, well, where do I go from here? Here's a little Saturday mission for you. This coming weekend, Ian's going to be breaking down how the board works. So we've looked here at specific protocols to do with the Monopoly board, the game of commerce. But there's a lot more to that rule book than meets the eye. And we've only just covered one specific segment of that on today's interview, specifically mortgages and recoupment of signature credit. But if you want to learn more about how the actual board works, that is going to put you in a much more commanding position to be able to play that game at a high level. Because the way that we describe this is that, yes, you're on the board. Yes, you're playing the game, but there's two different rule books here. You've got the beginner's rule book, and there is an advanced rule book that nobody talks about and nobody shows you where it is or how to use it. So what Ian's going to do is he's going to unpack that rule book. He's going to show you all the rules of the game, how the board works, and how you can benefit from that with the Monopoly Game Changer Protocol. And mortgages is just one piece in that puzzle that you can benefit from. There are plenty others to do with asset protection, to do with privacy. The list goes on and on and on. So I would encourage anybody, if you want to know more about this and you're watching us right now, whether you're on socials, no matter where you're at, then come and join us on Saturday. Ian's going to be breaking this all down, 10 a.m. UK time, Saturday morning here in the UK. If you want to know, well, how do I register for that webinar? You can go here. You can go to roswebinars.is and you can register for this upcoming Saturday's webinar at 10 a.m. And we would love to see you there, because I can't really wrap my head around why anybody wouldn't want to learn how to do this, Ian. I just can't. So on that note, any final thoughts?
I mean, I think that the whole subject is quite complicated. I realise that
it is,
but what in order to solve the complexity, the Ian Clifford avatar is coming out very, very soon.
Yeah,
and everything I've ever said, everything I've ever written is in that avatar, and it's got a knowledge base which you can ask it a lot of questions about what it is you want to know. And then if you want to do the void mortgage or the mortgage foreclosure, which, by the way, we're not quite ready to roll that out yet, but we're not far away, then you'll be able to engage with an avatar and an AI system that will create all of the documents. You can ask the avatar, what do I do now? This has just happened. You could even be in the courtroom, right? Or in the break of a court session, and you could go to your avatar on your phone in the break and say, this has just happened. What do I do now? And it should it should give you a range of options. It's not giving you legal advice,
no,
because it's just using it as a research tool.
Yeah.
By the way, I mean, the lawyers are using AI now, so why shouldn't you?
Yeah, exactly.
And my final thoughts are that if you are daunted by it all sounds too complicated, we're trying to make it easy by facilitating the Monopoly Game Changer.
Yeah.
Which, in my humble opinion, everybody should be doing that anyway.
Yeah, 100%.
There's no downside to it. There's only upside. And it doesn't even cost anything, because you're going to recoup the enrollment for it. So there's no cost to it.
Exactly. You're actually going to create your first new set of signature recoupment by doing that, aren't you?
Yeah. So that, people say, how much is it going to cost me? And I say nothing. And they say, well, really? And I say, yeah, because there is no money as substance. You're going to recoup your credit back again. So in the first few years of your experience of the Monopoly Game Changer, you're going to get all of your donation to ROS back. So actually, there's no cost. Imagine if you went to a car dealer. I'll just leave you with this thought, right?
Yeah.
Imagine you went to a car dealer and you wanted to buy a Bentley for $200,000, just because you really fancy one, right? And the car dealer said to you, do you know what? We've got a deal going at the moment. If you buy it today, you'll get the 200,000 back in less than a year. Fancy buying this car?
Wonder how many people would do that. Well, guys, thank you for joining us once again. I absolutely love having these conversations with you, Ian. And I hope that you guys that are watching are really starting to benefit from that. We've got lots of likes and hearts and hugs in the social media side of things, which is great to see. But really and truly, the only way that you're going to be able to help yourself is by taking action. So I hope that we see you on Saturday. Once more, if you want to register, it is roswebinars.is to register for Saturday, May the 2nd. We will see you there at 10 a.m. But for now, have a great day. Bye for now.
Bye now.